We are now living in the year 2020. We are living in a new decade, the decade of the 20s. It sounds quite surreal because when we say the 20s, we always think of the 1920s. But we are now living in the 2020s. We are living in the 1920s of today, which means some pretty bad things are going to happen in the future, right? In the near future. Things are going to get very, very interesting, but at the same time, we are going to be seeing things that will presage very, very dark times ahead. Human beings are naturally innovative and full of ingenuity. We have always been innovative, right? We are always looking for ways to make new technology. And of course, you have a huge amount of the human population looking for ways to help one another, medicine, things like that. But at the same time, you also have a huge part of the human population that wants human beings to kill each other because they can make money out of it, or they get joy out of watching the world burn. You have a small elite that makes a huge amount of money, a huge amount of profit, making military technology. And so as the years go by, people are going to have itchy fingers for war. That means that the narrative has to change. So what are we going to be seeing in the decade of the 20s? What can we expect in the decade I was about to say the 1920s, the 2020s? What can we expect for the 2020s? Well, we are going to see more violent shifts in the political narrative, more violent shifts, more so in favor for war and for militarization, for military buildup, for making more military technology. We are going to be seeing other countries that are currently and technically under the U.S. security blanket expressing more and more the idea and the aspiration for being independent from the military security umbrella. In other words, countries that are under the U.S. empire are going to want to become independent of that empire, to break free from the empire, to really revolt against the empire. And we're going to be seeing more and more of this in the decades. How do I know this? Because we have already been seeing this. We were seeing this in the 20 teens. 2018, 2019, 2017, 2016, we saw this. 2013, 2014, we saw this with Japan, talking about becoming more militarily independent from the United States. In fact, the Japanese have been talking about this going all the way back to the 1980s. Germany has been talking about becoming militarily independent from the United States. And again, you can go all the way back to the 1990s when Germany supported the idea of bombing Kosovo. And that was simply a strategy of increasing Germany's geopolitical leverage in the Balkans. And it's all about reviving that Germanic empire, controlling the Balkans, North Africa, the Sahel region of Africa, Europe. It's all about that empire. And with Brexit, which, if you think about it, Brexit was one of these shifts of the narrative. For decades, the British talked about how great the European Union was, but now the British are talking about how they want to leave the EU, and they're inevitably going to leave the EU. And that shift has caused another shift in the narrative, and that is an intensification of the discourse coming out of Germany in favor of German military independence from the United States. So the 2020s is going to be a very interesting decade because it is going to be a decade of global conflict preparation. And I'm not saying that that global conflict is going to take place in the 2020s. What I'm saying is that we are going to see an intensification of the preparation for global conflict. This is what we can expect. How do I know this? Well, if you look at government reports and media reports very close to government, talking about military innovation, they stress on the 2020s. The 2020s is their decade, and we see this coming out of Turkey, Germany, Hungary, Great Britain. The 2020s, if you look at reports coming out of these countries, has been seen as the decade in which military innovation is going to reach a significant position. So I'm going to give you guys some examples. I gathered up a few notes to substantiate what I'm saying, and I'm going to present these notes to you. So let's talk about Turkey first. Turkey has had major plans for the 2020s in regards to military innovation and also basically the creation of a Turkey independent of American power. And you're seeing this revolt taking place, coming out of Turkey, coming out of Germany, coming out of Japan. So in August of 2017, Erdogan made a speech in which he declared, quote, "Just like Turkey's vision for 2023 and 2053, we've also determined 2071, marking the 1000th anniversary of the Battle of Malazgirt, in which the Seljuk Turks defeated the Byzantine Empire, as a horizon line. We are proud of our ancestors who walked with glory, honor, and victory into the center of Europe after entering Anatolia from Malazgirt with the red flag in one hand and the green sanjak in the other." So the Turks defeated the Byzantine Empire in the Battle of Manzikert. He's saying Malazgirt, but in Western nomenclature it is known as Manzikert. And he's talking about this in light of this aspiration of making Turkey an empire again, which means war with the Western world, basically breaking free from Western control and establishing a Turkish empire in the Near East. And that's why today Turkey has been struggling with Israel, Greece, and Egypt over the Eastern Mediterranean. Israel, Greece, and Egypt both have claims, or all have claims to natural gas sources in the Eastern Mediterranean. Turkey wants to control the Eastern Mediterranean to also ascertain those natural gas resources. So, of course, it's all about resources, but also ideology plays a huge role in justifying these sorts of these imperialistic measures. There is a big Turkish defense corporation called the Kale Group, and the Kale Group is currently working with the British company Rolls-Royce to develop the TFX, and this is supposed to be Turkey's first independently made fighter jet. So according to one report from Invest in Turkey is a publication, it says, quote, "Rolls-Royce, the British automotive and aviation giant, and Kale Group, one of Turkey's prominent defense contractors, have announced the establishment of a joint venture. Kale Group will own 51% and Rolls-Royce 49% of the joint venture company, which will be known as the TAEC Aircraft Engine Industry Corporation. The agreement was signed on May 8th, 2017 in Istanbul. TAAC will produce jet engines for both military and civilian purposes, with intellectual property rights to the engines remaining in Turkey. Kale Group announced that they are taking the lead on the TFX National Fighter Jet project currently being developed by Turkish Aerospace Industries Incorporated. The TFX will be Turkey's first domestically designed and produced fighter jet, and it is meant to replace the current fleet of F-16s in the early 2020s. Now, so they're saying by the 2020s, Turkey's going to have its own fighter jet. And they're not going to use the F-16s anymore. So what is, the F-16 is an American fighter jet. America has given F-16s to Turkey, although now there's some sort of a controversy because Turkey has been buying military technology from Russia. I think it's called the S-400. And that has enraged a lot of the officials in the U.S. government. So it's all geopolitics. Of course, buying military technology is about money and profit, but there's a geopolitical agenda behind all of that. So why is Russia selling its military technology to Turkey? Because Russia wants to gain the favor of Turkey and pull Turkey away from the United States. The United States gives weapons technology to Turkey as a way to get Turkey into, or to keep Turkey within NATO's security umbrella. That is why during the Cold War, the United States had nuclear warheads in Turkey during the Cuban Missile Crisis. It was essentially saying, well, there is Soviet nuclear weapons in Cuba. Well, the U.S. was like, hey, we have nuclear weapons in Turkey, and Turkey isn't so far away from Russia. So you have these two nets of power, these two poles of power that are competing with each other, and they're all wanting to get those regional powers in their ranks in order to eclipse the other. And that's the reason why the United States made sure that Turkey is the second most armed country in NATO. That's why in the 1980s, the United States armed Turkey to the teeth. Why? It was all about the Cold War, and it was all about keeping certain countries in favor within the ranks of America's empire. Once America stops doing favors for other countries, stops paying for other countries' defense, stops selling weapons technology to other countries, those countries are going to go elsewhere for those resources and for those positive things that come about from making an alliance with, world empires and all that. In 2015, Erdogan, in a speech commemorating the Battle of Gallipoli, in which the Ottomans gained a major victory over the British in World War I, affirmed that, quote, a nation without its own defense industry cannot fight the cause of liberation. And he further added that by 2023, a Turkish-made combat plane will fly the Turkish skies. A Stratfor report from May of 2017 states that Turkey's, quote, goal is to achieve full self-sufficiency by 2023. Again, the 2020s is going to be a decade of immense military innovation. And also, not just military innovation, but you're going to see an intensification of efforts by countries like Turkey, Germany, Japan, to revolt against American hegemony. Because right now the U.S. rules the world. Russia is, trying to compete against that, but America more or less rules the world. America rules the seas. There is no empire that you can find in history that had control over the seas like the United States does today. There's not a ship that goes through the seas without America knowing about it. There's not a commercial ship or an exporting ship that goes that maneuvers through the seas that America doesn't know about. The Roman Empire didn't have the control over the seas that the United States has today. So America wants to keep that empire, but at the same time, it's almost like it's very interesting because you have people in the U.S. who want to maintain that empire, but at the same time, you have people in the United States who want that empire to kind of loosen up a bit and allow these regional powers like Turkey, Germany, to revolt and pursue empire for their own, pursue their own empire or to revive their own empires. And it's almost like the United States wants to repeat the Bretton Woods agreement. After, during the end of the Second World War, American officials got together somewhere, I think in Connecticut, and they basically said, listen, we all know America's going to win the war. And this was before the war ended, like not too long before the war ended. And they said, listen, we all know we're going to win the war. Germany knew it was going to lose the war. That's why they put all their money in Switzerland, or most of their money. And the United States has said, here's how it's going to be. Here's how the post-World War world is going to look like. The American dollar is going to be king. So perhaps what the Americans are doing is allowing these countries to revolt in order to have an opportunity to reset the dollar. It's possible. It's kind of an enigma as to why America is allowing Germany and Japan and Turkey to do their own thing. I guess America can't control all these countries, or maybe it's losing the capacity to control these countries, or maybe it doesn't want to control these countries anymore so as to allow a global conflict, and there's a lot of money to be made in a global conflict. So let's also go to Hungary. So since we're talking about Turkey, Hungary also wants to revamp and to build up its military. and to invigorate its military force, and it's doing so with the help of Turkey. Turkey has been participating in a major project of Hungary's called Zrínyi 2026. And so they're basically saying by 2026, Hungary is going to have a strengthened, a revamped military force, and it's going to be done with the help of Turkey. And then we can talk about the British Navy. The Brits have been developing a new naval ship called the Type 31E frigate. And they're saying by 2023, these ships are going to be in operation. Ready for service. Germany also sees the decade of the 20s as a planned decade for major military technology and for major innovation for that technology. So there was a 2019 August report from I can't read this, Europäische Schleicherheit und Technik. And it says, quote, as the core of the land forces and as carriers of country operations, it is important for the Army to translate these ambitious goals in a plausible ability nursery. The turnout for the nursery VJTF brigade have already been. Here we are in 2019 in the year of implementation. Planning it now mainly depends. This is translated from German to English, so it's not going to look that good. But it says planning it now mainly depends on the ability to ensure national and alliance defense divisions 2027. This article explores the question of what the Army yet required for an operational division by the year 2027. For example, combat, deployment, and management support are no longer available to the necessary degree. At the same time, the Army has to keep pace with technological developments. The trend towards rapid innovation and shorter product life cycles and the use of digital technologies will intensify in the coming years. New skills, innovation, and flexibility in the Army can open up only with a comprehensive digital strategy. The formation of a complete operational division includes division troops by 2027. And it says that this requires timely removal of existing capacity deficits and reconstruction of lost and developing new skills. And there's also a 2018 report from the European Organization of Military Associations and Trade Unions. And it says here that the Minister of Defense, and in this case it's talking about Ursula von der Leyen, she's no longer there. Her term has ended and she's been replaced. But in 2018, she was the defense minister of Germany. And it says here that the Minister of Defense presented her plan of action for the modernization of the German armed forces, which grants more money for new material and personnel. According to the plan, the main problems which should be tackled are the modernization of existing structures and the definition of new tasks for the German armed forces. The new plan meets the claims of the DBWV made in the program Powerful Bundeswehr 2025. Again, we're going back to the 20s is marked as the decade of major military innovation. The equipment problems of the Bundeswehr should be history. A capability profile describes the way to modernize the small-scale armed forces. This will be achieved in 3 intermediate steps, 2023, 2027, and 2031. So they already have plans for the 2030s. The union's defense policy spokesman Henning Otte said, quote, the plans assume that by 2023 we will have to move towards an annual financial requirement of around 60 billion euros. The CDU/CSU, and these stand for Christian Democratic Union and Christian Social Union, parliamentary group Johann this official from this party coalition, Johann David Wadepool, argues, quote, the Bundeswehr must become more modern and it must now grow again. That requires the security situation, which has been deteriorating for a long time. So the Germans, the Turks, the Hungarians, the Brits, they have been talking about a major plan for the 2020s, and that is military innovation. And you're starting to see, you have been seeing in the recent years, Germany working to rebel against the American empire. For example, Jean-Claude Juncker recently said that the strength of Europe, or the EU, must eclipse the American empire. America no longer must must no longer rule the world as it has. And so you're seeing this; it's quite obvious. And in fact, recently there was the head of a prominent German newspaper. His last name was Ulrich. I think his first name is Bernd. But he recently said today in an interview that he was asked about the new year and how he sees it, and he said something to the likes of, "The era of Merkel is over, and the era of the West ruling the world is over." And by the West, he was talking about the United States. The era of the West ruling the world is over. And so the Germans are pursuing world empire. Same with the Turks, same with the Japanese, and the Americans are allowing this to happen. The Americans are allowing for the buildup towards a global conflict. And so we are now entering an era in which humanity is going to transform its plowshares into swords. You guys just heard some theology. God bless.